So, David, what's about to happen down there?
Well, I can see a bunch of music stands and some chairs and some music stands without chairs. And I think that we are about to play a rehearsal and then film a performance of Richard Strauss's Metamorphosen for 23 solo strings, which is why there are 23 music stands on the stage plus one for the conductor. But oddly, I don't think they're facing the audience, and perhaps even more oddly, there will be no audience, at least not in the theatre, but we're hoping very much that people will be able to enjoy the film once it is streamed out.
So tell me the circumstances. At what stage did Richard Strauss write this piece?
Well, there's a whole load of evidence about what he was doing when he was doing it, but pretty clear is that he wrote out the fine copy in March 1945, which bears very little, tiny amount of comparison to where we are now, which is to say that normal life, it goes without saying, was completely disruptive. What was different, I suppose, about the awful, awful, awful things of the war is that unless your opera house had been bombed and destroyed, which sadly happened in Munich and Vienna, which is probably one of the things that inspired Strauss to write this piece. Apart from that, it was possible to meet together and for an audience between air raids to go into a theatre and listen to performances, which they did. We can't do that at the moment, which is very sad, and I haven't played next to colleagues for months, and I'm really looking forward to what we're about to do, which for me and I think for most of my colleagues will be our first performance together, so not at a distance, since March.
And how did you get the group together? And who are they?
The group that's about to play, I think, have been handpicked by the great Martin Brabins, who is the chief conductor at English National Opera, and I think is no stranger to Grange Park. And he has picked a bunch of musicians whom he knows, some of whom work with him regularly at English National Opera, and some of us have known him for years in various guises and various places, and I hope we're all up to the job.
And I like the way you always seem to refer to them as a bunch of musicians, rather like a bunch of bananas. Now, I've known you since we were about 13, 14, 15, 16. Tell me what you do now.
I play the violin, and a lot of the time I play the violin when circumstances allow in the London Symphony Orchestra, where I play second violin, which is in fact what I'm going to be playing today. But whereas in the London Symphony Orchestra I'm second of 2 violin parts, in this piece I will be second of 10 violin parts, because this is a slightly unusual piece. Massive
promotion. Now also tell me...
Thank you.
Also tell me, so London Symphony Orchestra, I'm fascinated by how it's run. The players are very, very involved, so will you explain to me how the orchestra's run?
Well, it's not unique in London, but it is slightly unusual in Europe, I suppose, in that we are all self-employed, which, as you can well imagine at the moment, has a particular meaning, or self-unemployed, as it has been up to this point. And a lot of the decisions regarding the day-to-day running of the orchestra are taken by groups, committees, subcommittees of players, and we take turns in doing some of this work, and it is very interesting but a little bit challenging to have to take some very unpleasant decisions sometimes, because somebody has to take them. It's a form of parenthood, I suppose, in a way. And it means that we have to put aside the child within us for a while and be grown-ups. And then at some point, you don't have to do it anymore, and you can go back to being a happy orchestral musician.
Now, give me some words to describe this extremely, well, it's sort of a restrained but quite an emotional piece, Metamorphosen.
It is heartfelt, it is ardent, it is by turns melancholy and sometimes almost not bombastic, but it does recall the triumphant moments in some of Richard Strauss's early pieces, which by now, he's in his 80s when he writes this piece, so the big famous operas and tone poems are 50, 60 years behind him, but even so, we get flashes of that youthful exuberance, and we are reminded that he came to fame at the height of the Viennese explosion of culture, end of empire, fin de siècle, luxurious, sensual stuff. But this piece ends quite clearly with a very sobering, a very solemn, not terribly hopeful message, but very beautiful and very moving for all that.
And tell me about the last page of it, because that always means something very special to me.
Well, the piece lasts about 30 minutes. It's one pretty much uninterrupted arc of music that just flows on and on and on and on. And the first time you see an instruction to slow down is about bar 498 out of about 510 bars. And at the end, some of the little themes out of which this huge arc has been woven, one in particular turns out, so Strauss says, unexpectedly while he was writing, he didn't realise that what he was writing sounds very much like the funeral march in Beethoven's Eroica Symphony. And when he realised this, he seems to have taken the decision overtly to include the theme as part of the very final part of the epilogue of the piece. And we know that it has some deep significance, although it's hard to say exactly what, because at the point where the double bass is introduced, this funeral theme, he writes the words in memoriam. And he starts the final fine copy of the manuscript the day after the destruction of the Vienna State Opera House. Munich has already fallen. It's 1945. His beloved German cities, German opera houses, German culture, German audiences lie in ruins. There are people who are about to go through a period of famine and hopelessness, and that's clearly all audible in the end of the piece.
Thank you very much, David.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me.